At the staggering age of 78, Dirk Bogarde shattered a lifetime of silence, finally breathing life into the names of the men he had secretly cherished. He once made a chilling observation, one that echoes with a terrible irony. The greatest performances are the ones nobody ever sees. And perhaps, in the most tragic twist of all, that very statement was his own final, heartbreaking performance, a role played for the entire world. Dirk Bogarde was the very soul of British restraint, the flawless composure in his voice, the impeccable grace in his posture, and that mysterious, unreadable smile. He was the undisputed face of post-war European cinema, impossibly elegant, deeply melancholic, and most of all, completely untouchable. Women were utterly captivated by him, critics showered him with endless accolades. The studios gambled everything on him, and yet, behind every photograph, within every single interview, and inside every role he ever inhabited, there was a profound emptiness, a chilling void you could sense in a pause that stretched just a second too long between his words. You could see it in a gaze that lingered for one heartbreaking beat too many, a deep silence that screamed volumes more than words ever could. Because far from the blinding glare of the public eye, behind the lush velvet curtains of Cannes, and concealed by the ancient stone walls of his Provence villa, and locked away, deep within the secret drawers of an old wooden desk, there were names, 6 absolutely forbidden names. These were names he would never dare to speak aloud, not under the blinding lights of press conferences, not even within the feigned honesty of his own memoirs, not even, it would seem, in the profound solitude of his final years. Until this very moment, unearthed from a closely guarded private collection, discovered only after his death, was a single, astonishing clue hidden amongst faded, forgotten photographs. Among a treasure trove of postcards and letters signed only with mysterious initials, one single, handwritten list finally came to light. It was a list that bore a simple, yet utterly chilling, title, Those Who Knew. On it were the names of 6 men, some of them world-famous, while others have been completely lost to the sands of time. One of them, incredibly, stood by his side for an astonishing 40 years, a constant companion through the blinding glamour of red carpets and the silent devastation of private illnesses. Another man shared the silver screen with him, in a film so electrically charged that critics described it as having an intimacy so raw it was almost uncomfortable for audiences to witness. One was a notorious figure, known for his tempestuous eyes and an even colder heart. The 4th name on this secret list is one that will leave you utterly speechless. This was a man who once exposed a shocking truth about Dirk, a truth so profound that not a single fan, not one director, not even his own family, could ever bring themselves to believe it. He was the one man who didn't just see through the masterful facade. He saw the deeply vulnerable soul of the actor concealed behind it. And then, there is the American, a profoundly tragic figure, a man who became a symbol of Hollywood's most heartbreaking sorrows. And the final name. Legend claims that he and Dirk crossed paths on one single, fateful night in the heart of Paris. There were no blinding camera flashes, no prying eyes of the press, only the gentle crackle of a record player and one shared bottle of wine. And 2 souls who, in that one fleeting moment, needed no words at all to understand each other completely. Now many would be quick to dismiss all of this as mere rumor, as whispers in the shadows. But the postcards are undeniably, tangibly real. The handwriting is a flawless match, the initials all align perfectly, and that lifelong, calculated silence, it is now absolutely deafening. In the moments that are about to unfold, we are going to unlock that drawer, revealing its secrets piece by painful piece, letter by letter, and memory by devastating memory. You are about to witness the side of Dirk Bogarde that the world was absolutely never meant to see. A facet of his very soul, a truth the world was ruthlessly forbidden from ever witnessing, not because he willed it so, but for a reason far more shattering. It was because the suffocating, iron-fisted reality of his era rendered it utterly impossible, a staggering truth that could only now, finally, be brought into the light. You must stay with us, because the absolutely explosive truth is woven into the most intricate details, and by the time we dare to speak the 4th name, your entire understanding of Dirk Bogarde and of the man who stood faithfully beside him will be irrevocably shattered. Part 1. The One Who Remained. Enter Anthony Forwood. He was the silent phantom in the glittering machine of fame, a figure who never once craved the spotlight, who never took a single, solitary bow. He never uttered a word for an interview that would scream from the morning headlines. And yet, for an absolutely astonishing 4 decades, he was the singular, unwavering anchor in the tempestuous, churning sea of Dirk Bogarde's existence, a man who stood silently, resolutely, at his side. Through the thunderous roar of applause and the crushing, deafening silence that inevitably followed, to the world he was officially and simply Dirk's manager. That was the meticulously crafted narrative, the public fiction endlessly repeated in press releases and whispered conspiratorially through the hallowed halls of the studios. But one is compelled to ask, what kind of manager moves into your private home, vacations with you and you alone, shares your breakfast table for 40 agonizingly long years, and is the singular soul still standing there when the nurses make that soul-crushing call in the dead of night? Their paths were destined to cross in the early 1950s. Dirk, a star ascending with meteoric, unstoppable force, and Anthony, who was gracefully receding from the very same acting world. He was consciously retreating into a life of profound privacy. Their connection was instantaneous, yet it was not born of some fiery, cinematic explosion of sparks. It was not forged in high drama, but in a deep, unspoken understanding that resonated in their very souls. And while the world naively labeled it a close working relationship, the privileged few who witnessed them beyond the glare of the camera saw something else entirely, a staggering truth that would never, under any circumstances, be splashed across the tabloids. Instead, that truth echoed in the ink of deeply personal, handwritten notes, it was preserved in the emulsion of private photographs, and it lived in the rare, unguarded smiles captured only in the moments between them. In one particularly haunting image, captured on a sun-drenched afternoon in the heart of Provence, Dirk and Anthony are seen sitting together, sheltered beneath the branches of a sprawling, ancient tree. Books rest gently in their hands, wine glasses sit half full beside them. They are not posing for any camera. In that moment, they are simply, profoundly, existing together. And in that breathtaking, profound stillness, you can see everything. This was not romance as the world so crudely understands the term. It was something far more ancient, something infinitely deeper, an unbreakable, sacred bond that was forged in the purifying fires of absolute, unyielding privacy. It was a bond tested by decades of living in the shadows. And then, when Anthony was so tragically diagnosed with cancer in the late 1980s, Dirk did not retreat. He did not vanish into the background. Instead, he moved into that cold, sterile hospital room, where he sat a constant vigil by the bed and forced himself to sleep in a cramped, unforgiving chair. He was the one who signed the endless, soul-numbing forms, who answered the doctor's harrowing questions, and who remained through every single agonizing moment of the absolute, unthinkable worst of it. A brazen reporter once dared to ask Dirk about Anthony's deteriorating condition. He simply, and devastatingly, replied, "He's the only one who ever truly knew the real me," and walked away. After Anthony passed, a single perfect white rose mysteriously appeared outside their shared home. It was laid beneath a simple flat stone, etched with only the initials AF. There was no press release, no public statement. There was only a profound, heartbreaking silence. And when Dirk himself passed away a decade later, a stunning discovery was made. That very same stone was found resting on his writing desk, beside old film scripts and love-worn books, and a faded photograph of himself and Anthony on a sailboat, smiling, forever, into the Sunday. They never once called each other lovers, never uttered the words partner or husband, but every handwritten letter, every shared glance, every profound absence of any need to explain, spoke volumes more than any hollow label ever could. You see, Anthony Forwood was never a secret. He was Dirk's beginning, his middle, and his ultimate end, the very first name on this list, the one who always stayed. Part 2. James Fox, The Servant and the Mirror. In the year 1963, Dirk Bogarde accepted a role that would chillingly come to define the very shadows. The shadows he had spent his entire life navigating. And make no mistake, The Servant was no ordinary film. This transcended class, it defied the very notion of power. It was about an electrifying, unspoken gravity between two men, trapped in a bond that defied every convention society could imagine and every line the script could provide. On the silver screen, Dirk embodied Barrett, the profoundly mysterious manservant. Opposite him, James Fox, a dazzling young star on the ascent, portrayed Tony, the privileged, upper-crust employer, whose world was meticulously dismantled by the very man he brought into his home. Yet, what truly mesmerized audiences wasn't the storyline, it was the raw, undeniable truth in their gaze, a look that felt less like performance and more like a forbidden confession. Behind the scenes, their connection was just as potent. They were utterly inseparable, yet their bond was a quiet, almost invisible force, a magnetic pull so intense it sent hushed whispers rippling through the crew, hidden behind the glaring lights and looming microphones. A crew assistant would later remember that the moment the director yelled, "Cut!" the two men would often just remain, seated in a profound silence, their shoulders barely touching, as if continuing a silent dialogue that the rest of the world was deaf to. In the private pages of his journal, Dirk would confess that James was the very first man who never flinched, the first soul who refused to break his gaze when the fragile boundary between their characters and their true selves completely dissolved. The film's intimacy was so potent, critics labeled it deeply unsettling. As one stunned reviewer famously wrote, "You don't simply watch The Servant, you feel as though you are eavesdropping on it." And that staggering discomfort, that almost unbearable tension, that wasn't merely brilliant acting, it was the terrifying, undeniable truth of their chemistry. It was something raw, explosive, and barely contained, a truth that would linger for years to come. Decades later, when James Fox was asked about his experience working with Dirk, he fell into a long, reflective pause before finally speaking. He said, "He gave me everything, and he expected absolutely nothing in return." But as we now know, that wasn't the whole, devastating story. Because hidden away among Dirk's most private belongings, a letter was discovered unsigned, but penned in the unmistakable hand of James Fox. And in it were these shattering words: "There were moments between us that made me question everything I thought I knew about myself, and I have never forgotten them. Not a single one." The note was folded with incredible care, tucked away behind the original shooting script for The Servant, a script covered in Dirk's own underlines and frantic margin notes. Some of the notes were emotional, others seethed with anger, and one particular word was simply circled 3 times. Barrett would stand vigil as he slept, and an absolute, impenetrable silence would descend upon the room, a sacred quiet they would never, ever dare to violate. And so, in a desperate flight towards normalcy, James embarked on a quest to build a new life. He married, raised children, and wrapped himself in the armor of a fervent, born-again Christian faith. He systematically attempted to obliterate his past, putting an impossible distance between himself, the film, Dirk, and the specter of that entire, haunting episode of his life. But Dirk was incapable of letting go. He clung to every memento, safeguarding the script and cherishing the letters as if they were holy relics from a lost religion. And there, inside a box ominously labeled "Those Who Knew," James's name was listed second, inscribed in an ink that seemed impossibly dark, terrifyingly permanent. It was a monument to a memory that would not die, a truly shocking revelation given they had shared the screen just one single, solitary time. And yet, in that one brief, cataclysmic collision of their souls, something inside them was irrevocably shattered and then forged anew. This was never love, nor was it merely desire. It was something infinitely more profound, a force that would echo through the remainder of their lives. You must understand, James Fox didn't just perform opposite Dirk Bogarde. In some terrifying, fundamental way, he became his mirror. And for a man who had lived his entire existence shrouded in shadows, there is no intimacy more terrifying and none more profound than to finally, truly be seen. We now turn to Part 3, Lawrence Harvey, the Cold Flame. Lawrence Harvey didn't just enter a room, he conquered it, striding in with the absolute certainty of a king surveying his domain. Such was the sheer magnetic force of his presence. He possessed razor-sharp cheekbones, wore impeccably tailored suits as if they were armor, and had eyes like frozen shards of ice locked behind impenetrable glass. In this man, Dirk saw not a reflection, but something far more intoxicating, a kindred spirit, a dangerous and utterly magnetic rival. He was never, ever a friend. He was always a challenge to be met. Both men were absolute virtuosos of a chilling, perfectly calculated stillness. They were absolute masters of concealment, both possessing a severe, breathtaking beauty that was almost painful to behold. It was a kind of beauty that deeply unsettled people, one that hinted at the profound truth that just beneath the dazzling headlines, and buried under mountains of fan letters, both men were devastatingly and utterly alone, even as they navigated the very same glittering social circles. They dined at the same exclusive tables and offered the same rehearsed smiles to the same flashing cameras, but an undeniable, turbulent undercurrent stirred just beneath the placid surface. A single, fateful photograph, taken at the 1959 BAFTA after-party, captured a fleeting moment that was absolutely never meant for public eyes. There was Dirk, seated and utterly isolated with a drink in his hand, his gaze stolen away in a distant, sideways glance. And then, materializing from the soft focus of the background, was Lawrence, his eyes fixed intently upon Dirk, not with warmth, not with friendship, and not even with malice, but with a raw, unnerving fixation. It was a look that would ignite the firestorm of whispers that was soon to follow. These were not rumors for the tabloids, but far more insidious whispers shared in the hallowed sanctity of dressing rooms, over drinks in shadowy bars, and in the electric silences between takes. They were far too similar to ever get along, one director once famously declared. Perhaps that is precisely why they could never truly leave each other alone, even though they never once shared a screen, not a single time. And yet, an uncanny pattern emerged. They were frequently spotted leaving the very same glamorous events, always just minutes apart, seen in the same opulent hotel lobbies, glimpsed in the same hidden corners of London's most exclusive private clubs. And yet, they were never together, always orbiting, always just missing one another. Lawrence, after all, was a fiercely private man, evasive, impossibly complicated. For years, rumors clung to him like a second skin, rumors about a life lived in the shadows, about things that could never be spoken aloud. Potential roles were mysteriously rejected, entire relationships condemned to the shadows, never to see the harsh light of day. He dutifully went through the motions, a marriage, a divorce, then would suddenly materialize on red carpets with a beautiful, yet completely anonymous, woman on his arm. But behind the closed doors of Hollywood's inner sanctum, the men who truly knew him whispered a profoundly different and far more complicated story. One film producer, in a memoir considered too explosive to ever publish, wrote that Harvey and Bogarde were never lovers in any physical sense. No, they were something infinitely more tragic. They were addicts, hopelessly hooked on the intoxicating idea of each other, a forbidden prize neither could ever claim, yet from which neither could ever look away. And so, when Lawrence Harvey's life was tragically extinguished at just 45 years of age, the press mourned the loss of a brilliant, fallen star. Dirk, however, offered nothing. No words, no comment, just a profound, deafening silence that would stretch on for many, many years. During a rare and candid interview, a journalist finally dared to pose the question, which actor did he admire above all others? His reply was instantaneous, a pure reflex: Lawrence. But the true, soul-shattering answer lay in the vast universe of everything he left unsaid. In a private box, among a collection hauntingly labeled "Those Who Knew," Lawrence's name was listed third. Yet, the very paper bearing his name was different, noticeably thinner, infinitely more fragile, as if worn down by the constant passage of time and touch. It was marred by a single, telling burn mark near the bottom corner, the faint ghost of a cigarette left to smolder just a moment too long. Was it a mere accident, a fleeting moment of carelessness, or was it a sign of something far, far more profound? Perhaps Dirk simply could not bear to see that name resting so pristine and unscorched, because Lawrence Harvey was never the one who stayed. He was the great escape, the ultimate one who got away, leaving the world feeling colder and profoundly emptier in his absence. Part 4. John Fraser. The man who would finally break the silence. He was never the dashing matinee idol, never the celebrated household name. He was never the headline, but in this story's final, dramatic act, John Fraser became the one voice that truly mattered. He was the one voice that Dirk Bogarde, with all his immense power and meticulous control, could never, ever hope to silence. For years, they had moved in the same rarefied circles. It was a world of brilliant theater men and glittering BBC parties. They even shared the same agents and, for a brief time, the same friends. And, for one fleeting, incandescent moment, they shared something infinitely more intimate. Fraser was, by all accounts, devastatingly handsome and incredibly whip-smart. He carried himself with a stage-like bravado that Dirk found both utterly captivating and terrifyingly real. While Dirk would instinctively fold inward, vanishing into the shadows, John was a blazing inferno of truth, a brilliant, revealing flame. Where Dirk sought to erase, John was determined to expose. Their bond was a firework, intense, brilliant, but heartbreakingly brief. Not for long, but just long enough. Long enough for Fraser to glimpse the terrifying cracks spreading across Dirk's perfect facade. Long enough to notice that chilling moment when Dirk's eyes would go vacant, looking straight through you, the second a conversation dared to touch upon something real, something true. And yes, long enough to experience that intoxicating, dizzying thrill of being truly seen by a man who seemed to see through the very soul of everyone else. Everyone, it seemed, except for the man in his own mirror. And then, with the same shocking suddenness it began, it was over. It ended quietly, cleanly. No explosive confrontation, and absolutely zero closure. True to his nature, Dirk simply vanished, retreating back into the impenetrable, self-made fog that shrouded his entire existence. But John Fraser was not a man to forget. Decades later, he would detonate a bombshell memoir titled Close Up, and in its pages, Fraser penned the words that would shatter Hollywood's carefully constructed illusion, like a stone crashing through a cathedral's stained glass. Dirk Bogarde was gay, and furthermore, the book declared, he was profoundly in love with his lifelong partner, Anthony Forwood. The press erupted into an absolute frenzy, condemning it as the ultimate, unforgivable act of betrayal. Of course, some cynics dismissed his words as the bitter ramblings of a scorned man, but those who dared to look closer saw something infinitely more profound. This wasn't bitterness he was putting on the page. It was a testament to a profound, soul-crushing grief. He wrote of the sheer agony of watching a man condemned to live a mere shadow of a life, of countless hollow dinners where Anthony would sit, ghost-like, in utter silence. All while Dirk masterfully performed the role of charming host, and he wrote of the secret, agonizing hospital visits the public could never, ever be allowed to know about. And then, Fraser described one haunting night in the early 1960s, when he made a clumsy, yet achingly careful confession of his own. He confessed his true feelings for Dirk, who in return offered nothing but a devastating, suffocating silence, his gaze locking onto John's for what felt like an impossible eternity. It was an absolutely unbearable moment, a fragile eternity shattered by a single, crushing word, don't. And with that, he simply turned his back and walked away. And yet, incredibly, Fraser never blamed him. Instead, in his book, he bestowed upon Dirk a truly heartbreaking title, The Saddest Man I Ever Knew. Not because Dirk was heartless, Fraser explained, but because he was utterly terrified not of the world's judgment, but of the man staring back at him from the mirror. He lived a life of masterpieces, Fraser wrote with aching clarity, but not once did he allow himself to be someone's favorite painting. Of course, the predictable chorus of critics dismissed the book, branding it as nothing more than cheap gossip born from the poison of jealousy. But hidden away, tucked inside the sanctity of Dirk's most private desk drawer, nestled among faded letters and old theater programs, lay a stunning, unspoken secret. It was a single, solitary page, carefully torn from Close Up, the very page where John Fraser had dared to name him. The edge of the paper was frayed and worn, the ink faintly smudged, the unmistakable, telltale signs of a page that had been read and reread over and over again, as if its words were a brand impossible to ever truly forget. And there, on that very page, in a list starkly titled, Those Who Knew, John's name was listed fourth, and it was underlined not once, but twice, in a bold, almost defiant ink, a shocking and unheard-of rarity for the meticulously private Dirk. You see, in the end, John Fraser wasn't a lover, nor was he even a secret. He was something infinitely more dangerous. He was a mirror. He was the man who dared to speak the truths Dirk kept locked away in the deepest vaults of his soul, and perhaps that, more than any unrequited love, more than any unspoken longing, is what finally, irrevocably, shattered the deafening silence. Part 5. The Enigma of Richard Burton, the man who spoke only in code. Their paths never crossed on the silver screen, their names never once whispered together in the scandalous columns of Hollywood tabloids. And yet, an unseen current flowed between Dirk Bogarde and Richard Burton, a clandestine trail of letters, breathtaking in their poetry, staggering in their depth, and so exquisitely crafted in their ambiguity that they could be dismissed at a moment's notice, yet would forever be seared into memory. Burton was a magnificent tempest of contradictions, a man whose voice could shake the rafters, yet who guarded his inner world with ferocious privacy, a truly untamed spirit who wielded words with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. His legendary life was a public spectacle, marrying the incomparable Elizabeth Taylor not once, but twice, battling a thirst as epic as his performances, and consuming Shakespeare's verses between takes as if they were air itself. And yet, somewhere within that whirlwind of cinematic triumphs and personal wreckage, he carved out a sacred space to write to Dirk Bogarde. But these were no ordinary correspondences. They bore no dates, no signatures. They were merely meticulously folded pages, surreptitiously slipped into the spines of books, like secrets waiting to be found. They were entrusted only to the most loyal of friends for hand delivery, or dispatched from opulent hotels, whose names now exist only as echoes in the corridors of memory. One such missive, miraculously preserved within the sanctuary of Dirk's private collection, unveils a sentiment so profound it could stop your heart. It simply reads, "If I were not Richard, and you were not Dirk, imagine the quiet, beautiful lives we might have dared to live. But we are who we are, and so we do not." Another note, hastily scribbled on the back of a tattered theater program, confesses, "The sea was a roaring beast today, and it made me ache for silence." The kind of profound quiet you carried into a room without a single effort. The precise origin of their connection remains shrouded in absolute mystery. Some accounts place their first meeting at a benefit reading in the hallowed halls of Oxford, while others whisper of an intimate dinner in Rome, where these two titans spent untold hours unraveling the complexities of poetry and politics, while their respective companions reportedly grew weary and simply drifted away. But whatever the genesis, the true story lies in what endured. A correspondence that defied the years, always painstakingly careful, always veiled in code. Close confidants of Burton would later confess that he had a fatal weakness for falling in love with brilliant minds, not merely with physical forms. And Dirk, impenetrable, fiercely intelligent, utterly elusive, was the exact kind of magnificent puzzle that Burton longed to trace with his fingertips, but never truly solve. They possessed a profound understanding of one another, as one of Burton's biographers astutely observed, and in their world, understanding was an infinitely more dangerous affair than simple desire. When Burton tragically passed away in 1984, Dirk Bogarde did not attend the funeral. He never once uttered Burton's name in a public forum, but a discovery made on Dirk's own bookshelf, tucked inside a prized first edition of Under Milk Wood, spoke volumes. There, a note in Dirk's unmistakable hand read, "He made a noise in the world like no other man, but I was always listening for the profound quiet that lay beneath." Richard Burton's name was listed fifth, penned in a smaller, almost hesitant script, tucked away toward the margin, as if Dirk himself wrestled with whether to include him at all. But he did, and that simple, quiet act says absolutely everything. The bond they shared was not love as the storybooks and screenplays so often describe it. They were not partners in life, nor were they adversaries. Nor was their story one of clandestine meetings in the dead of night. They were something far more extraordinary, two souls who communicated in the silent language of riddles. And yet, defying all logic, they understood each other perfectly. Part 6. Montgomery Clift. The Stranger Who Understood. And here is the absolutely staggering truth. They never once shared a single frame of film. Their images were never captured in the same photograph, nor did they ever grace the same red carpet, a universe apart in the public eye, or even appear at Hollywood's glittering galas. And yet, a persistent, whispered legend from those who knew them most intimately insists that fate intervened, just once, in the very heart of Paris. There was no specific date recorded, no flashing press cameras, no grand fanfare. It was simply a quiet, profound evening, shared between two men who had tragically run out of places to hide. By then, Montgomery Clift was already a specter of his former self, not yet gone from this world, but undeniably fading. His face, once so, had begun to carry the crushing weight of years stolen by silence. He spoke rarely, and his smiles were even rarer. But when a smile did break through, it wasn't polite, it was a truly haunting sight. And then there was Dirk. Always cautious, never daring to make the first move, he saw in Monty a reflection of his own soul that was both terrifying and utterly undeniable. Here was a man who had suffered the exact same silent agony, yet somehow he wore his scars on the surface for the entire world to witness. The legend tells of their paths crossing in a friend's apartment near Montmartre, where a lone piano stood as a silent witness in the corner. Tendrils of cigarette smoke danced over half-forgotten glasses of wine, and whatever words passed between them, they were heartbreakingly, tragically few. In truth, the real conversation, the profound truth of that night, unfolded in the pregnant pauses between words, in the lingering glances, and the silent acknowledgments that screamed volumes. And then, a poem. Was it Rilke? Or could it have been Yeats? Whispered by Monty, his voice cracking, shattering with raw emotion right in the middle of a verse. Dirk, completely mesmerized, didn't dare breathe. He simply listened, and in the deafening, profound silence that fell after the final word, they both knew, with absolute certainty, that everything that ever needed to be said between them had been. No letters from that night would ever be discovered. No photographs would ever emerge from the shadows. There were no mementos, no gifts exchanged, nothing but a single ghostly voice memo, unearthed from the dust of time decades later. It was found buried deep within a drawer of forgotten cassette tapes, its label marked with nothing more than a solitary, maddeningly cryptic question mark. The recording is faint, almost swallowed by static, but through the relentless hiss and crackle, a few absolutely devastating words break through. He didn't just look at me, he looked times inside times of me, and I believe I needed that more than I ever knew was possible. Could that possibly be Monty's voice? The experts refused to confirm a thing, and the friends who might hold the answer remained maddeningly, stubbornly silent. But the handwriting scrawled on the tape's simple envelope, that was, without a shadow of a doubt, Dirk's. And for those desperately searching for the truth, that single fact was everything. On that now infamous list, Montgomery Clift's name appeared sixth. It wasn't underlined for emphasis, nor was it circled for importance. It was simply there, penned quietly, almost reverently, as if Dirk himself was terrified to disturb the sacred memory it held, as if speaking the name aloud might shatter the fragile, unspoken understanding that had once, for a fleeting moment, existed between them. He wasn't classified as a lover, nor was he relegated to the simple category of a friend. He was something infinitely more profound, a perfect mirror in the suffocating darkness, a kindred soul who never demanded a thing and never confessed a word. He never stayed, of course, but in that one fleeting, impossible moment, he understood it all, without a single syllable ever being exchanged. For on that one singular night, inside that one solitary room, Montgomery Clift gave Dirk Bogarde a gift that was truly priceless. It was something no one else on that entire list could ever hope to provide, a moment of pure, unadulterated peace. This wasn't the fleeting high of joy, nor the simple comfort of relief. It was a brief, almost holy moment where neither man had to perform, where neither had to pretend. And maybe, for a soul like Dirk's, that was the only validation he ever truly yearned for, a truth he would carry to his grave, never once uttering it aloud. You would never find him on a public stage, defiantly declaring his truth. He never wore the symbolic ribbons, nor did he ever join the thunderous marches for freedom. No, his story was whispered in the silent, profound gestures, in the lingering, searching glances, the heartbreaking, unsent letters, and in a ferocious loyalty that burned brightly for an entire lifetime. In his own quiet, defiant way, Dirk Bogarde laid his entire soul bare for us, and perhaps that is the very reason it strikes such a devastating chord within us all. Because it is only now, with the clarity of hindsight, that we can finally grasp the staggering, heartbreaking cost, the universe of missed opportunities, the ocean of affection that could never be freely expressed. We can now see the agonizing decades spent trapped in a metaphorical prison, a gilded cage where even love itself was a fugitive, forced to communicate only in hushed, desperate whispers. 6 names, 6 souls intertwined with his. Some were permanent constellations in his sky, while others were fleeting phantoms, just ghosts passing through the lonely night. Some, miraculously, returned his love in equal measure. Others offered a silent, profound communion of understanding. And in the final, devastating analysis, perhaps that was the only true solace his heart could ever find. For a man who was forged in the crucible of an era that viciously punished even the slightest whisper of tenderness, a time when to be truly seen could utterly annihilate a career, perhaps existing in the heartbreaking realm of the almost was the only real freedom he was ever destined to know. He poured every ounce of his soul into performances that absolutely mesmerized the world, and in return, the only thing he ever asked for was the sacred sanctuary of his privacy. He begged for space, he pleaded for the simple grace of time, but time, the relentless, unforgiving force it is, has marched forward, and the world has been forever and irrevocably transformed. And now, the very truth he so desperately shielded from the world has erupted into the light, revealing a man who was so much more than a mere matinee idol. He was never simply the thinking woman's fantasy. He was a man who loved with a depth so profound, so staggering, it could move mountains. A love condemned to the shadows, a love that was forged to last for all eternity. And if you felt something stir deep within you as this story unfolded, a sudden, breathtaking stillness in your chest, a gentle yet undeniable ache tightening in your throat, it is because some deep primal part of your soul already knew the truth. You recognize the crushing, deafening silence of a life half-lived. You recognize the desperate hiding, the soul-crushing longing, the haunting specter of what could have been, and that, right there, is precisely why we must now speak his name and all of theirs aloud. We speak their names today because, at long last, we finally can. And for all the souls who still cannot speak their own truth, we hold their sacred stories in our hearts as well. If these powerful, hidden histories resonate deep within your soul, if you believe with every fiber of your being that a love, even one brutally forced into silence, deserves, at long last, to be honored in the light of day, then we implore you to join us. Subscribe, because there are countless more names, an ocean of untold stories, and innumerable truths still languishing in the shadows, absolutely yearning to finally have their voice.